welcome. I am here with Kirsty Lee.
Yes, good morning.
This is Kirsty Lee. I've just found out she can't skip.
No.
Interesting fact about Kirsty. Every day's a school day. We are inside. We are 2 metres apart, but we are inside because we've been doing free lunches for kids out of the Phoenix this week. So we're surrounded by a wall of Golden Wonder and lunch boxes. The Beano have given us a bunch of copies to give away. We've got lots of yummy fruit because we are good and responsible. And Kirsty
And you can't see the chocolate biscuits.
Yeah, there's also chocolate biscuits. So we are going to be sharing 3 verses each. We're going to have a chat about them. So one verse that the previous generation have passed on to us, one that is relevant to us in the current season, and one that we would pass on to other people. Some of our verses are legitimately one verse, others are multiple verses, but all together.
Yes.
So it kind of counts.
Breaking the rules.
Yeah. Because we're young and trendy, and half of us are young and trendy. Half of us are just trendy. What can you do? Anyway, a passage that, passage that the previous generation have given us. Do you want to read yours first?
Yeah, absolutely. Mine comes from 1 John.
I thought you were going to do the same. Mine comes from 1 Peter.
Oh, that would have been so good. Yeah. Disappointingly not. Mine comes from 1 John chapter 4, verse 19. It says, "We love because he first loved us." Short and sweet.
I'll read mine and then we can talk a bit about why we have these certain ones. So mine is 1 Peter chapter 2 verse 9, which says, "But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people belonging to God, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light."
I love that.
So why did you choose this one?
This took me the longest to come up with this one actually. I think my kind of current one and then my one for the next generation came quicker. But I've just been thinking over the last couple of weeks. Last week was the 5-year anniversary of my dad passing away, and I wrote this thing on Facebook that got a lot more attention than I expected it to. But in that I wrote about this fact that my dad loved until he didn't really know what else to do, when he wasn't capable of doing much else. And I think that is just the epitome of who we are deep down in our souls, that we are created to love, and that this verse totally speaks out that truth as well, that we love because because God loved us first. We were created in love, by love, for love. And it's just an inspiring way to live your life, to choose love over anything else.
Cool. I think, so one of my challenges is I'm going to pick 3 verses each week when I talk about different people. So I probably would have chosen that one of the other weeks. I still might do, because someone might not watch this one. And then I get to reuse other people's.
We can all act surprised.
But yeah, just I think for me that knowledge that we don't love out of a deficit, out of a dry place, but out of first being loved and first, it's almost a reaction rather than us taking that first step, but it's God's love within us working itself out.
For sure, yeah. And how amazing to be led by example as well, through the cross and through the way that God loves us. Yeah.
I haven't really thought about it in those terms, but I guess that sense of leadership, of asking people to do something, like taking up their cross or denying themselves or saying love your enemies. But for Jesus to have gone before us and to be the prototype of that call to not just tell us to love, but to have gone through it first, and I guess just even being on the cross and saying, "Father, forgive them."
Yeah, for sure.
And just the depth of love that has to come from that you can't say those words without love being your primary motive.
Absolutely.
To talk about love, so my one is, I kind of chose this, probably not this verse in particular, but an idea in here of being a royal priesthood, a holy nation of people belonging to God. So my mum grew up in the church. My granddad's a vicar on that side. But my dad didn't grow up in church. Went to boarding school, became a Christian while at boarding school. Went to uni with Nicky Gumbel and a bunch of other folk who I think challenged his faith when he was kind of like, this was cool in high school, but maybe not now. But one thing my dad talks about a lot is being princes and princesses of the blood royal. And just this sense of identity. I think sometimes when I grew up in the church, I know you didn't particularly, but I think sometimes we take this stuff for granted, and just the love of God and the identity and the transformational nature that comes with that we get. Yeah, I think sometimes when, I can only talk for myself, I guess, but having grown up in the church, a lot of this stuff just makes sense to me because it's been what I've always known. But I think when you talk to people that have experienced that transformation, where you go from darkness into light, where you go from not knowing that sense of identity, that sense of adoption, I think it's always interesting. So one of our volunteers in the Phoenix, and a couple of our volunteers actually are foster carers in different capacities. One does it full time, one does it as respite. But just seeing the way these guys love their kids, and they're not their kids, but they are their kids, and I guess seeing adoption and seeing that idea of we are adopted into the royal family, that it's not just we get to be part of God's family, and we're seen as the kind of weird kids at the edge, but he invites us into being everything, being part of it fully, that we get to be a royal priesthood, that we get to be a holy nation, that we get to belong to God. I think grace has always been a clear bit of the Rock's DNA, whether that's been my mum or dad or that generation that went before us. We gave the McIndoes and the Robertsons and the McClungs and all that generation that kind of started stuff off. Just seeing grace and the love of God being at the forefront of that. Yeah.
It's inspiring.
Amen.
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 Done.
Done. So we've got 2 more verses each there. So one for just now. I've got mine here.
Oh man, you're so much better than me.
I've got post-it notes.
Oh.
This is what comes with wisdom. A few grey hairs, but also the use of post-it notes.
It's the difference between a master's and a bachelor's.
Yeah, that's it. I am going to read mine, and then I'll let Kirsty find hers. So mine is kind of one verse, but it's in the context of a few more. So I'll read the one verse and then I'll read it in the wider context. So I'm in Jeremiah 29, verse 7 in particular, but verses 4 to 7. So verse 7 says, "Also seek the peace and prosperity of the city in which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper." And the wider bit is, "This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses and settle down. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number there, do not decrease. Also seek the peace and prosperity of the city in which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. That's my one. What's your one?
Mine says in Hebrews chapter 10, specifically looking at verses 23 to 25. It says, "Let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, for he who promised is faithful. And let us consider how we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds. Let us not give up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but let us encourage one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching."
So why that?
I just think it's amazing. I think that in those 3 verses, there's just so much to unpack in that. Just this idea of holding unswervingly, like you're on a ship that's in this ocean that's just turning and turning, and the waves just keep crashing. Like life can sometimes feel like that, where you're just clinging on to the mast, like arms and legs wrapped around. And that's what I think of when I think about this idea of holding unswervingly to the hope. But it's the hope that we profess. Like, it can be really easy sometimes. Like, I find it quite easy to say to my friends who aren't Christians, like, oh, like, I'll be praying about that or something. But when I find myself in that situation, or a situation that I'm struggling with, harder to pray for, if that makes sense. Like, I find it easier to profess than to hold fast in my own promises that I give to others. So I think that's a really good reminder. And then just again, this idea of spurring one another on, like encouraging people to walk in love, is always something I think we should be doing as a church, as individual Christians. Christ calls us to love and show the world how he loved us by loving them. And then I guess it's a bit ironic that we're coming out of a pandemic, or in the middle of a pandemic, or at some stage in the pandemic, that it says, let us not give up meeting together as some is in the habit of doing. I think that our Sunday calls are the mass that people are clinging to at the moment. I'm really enjoying them. I really like just watching other people have conversation, just for the chance of it being other people. But yeah, just about that idea of not giving up, but continuing to meet together in these very current times, I think is just really encouraging.
I think as much as I think of us as roughly the same age, I'm also old enough to be your dad, which is a scary thought. But I know I was going to talk about our generation, for my generation, and maybe it's the same for yours. I know a lot of Christians who have got into the habit of not meeting together, who kind of find church a bit irrelevant and have gone, I just can't connect with that, so end up not going anywhere and still walking with God and still their faith being a huge part of their lives, but not connecting into a regular church community. And there's definitely times it's been difficult for me to be part of church community. I know feeling God called me back to Dumbarton, and there was a period the people closest in age to me were probably 8 years younger than me. So 8 years younger and probably 10 years older. There was a period where it was just me in this big kind of 18-year gap. And so oftentimes where it'd be so easy just to go, what's the point in this? Why bother doing this? And there's so much about church that doesn't really connect with me. And yet there's something about being together with the people of God and just walking through it together. And there's so many people at the Rock that I dearly love, but probably if we weren't Christians we'd never hang out with them, because
For sure.
you just wouldn't interact. So there's something joyful about being with people of different ages and different backgrounds and conflicting beliefs at times, where we think differently on stuff but can still be unified in this same pursuit. And I think to not meet is easy. I think, especially in this pandemic as well, just to go, I'll just do my own thing for a bit, would be really easy. Do you, like, we haven't discussed what verses we're going to talk about ahead of time, so these are not pre-prepared questions, but do you see that in your generation, that there's a reluctance to engage in church, or
as Christians or as a whole?
I'm thinking of as Christians.
As Christians, yes and no. We are the same generation by the skin of our teeth, I think. We're both millennials, so we're both responsible for ruining the world, but only by a marginal. But yeah, I think so. Like, I know Christians who have 23, 24 launched their own ministries, have spent their year at halls in a university, converting everyone and anyone they could find. I also know Christians who went off to university and have never spent a Sunday morning in church, or a Wednesday evening in the Bible. That's my Baptist side coming out of me. A Wednesday night Bible study and a Sunday morning church. So I think for my generation, and this is kind of leading on to what I'm going to say about my passage for the future generations, but I think we do things and we do things hard. We are either nothing or 100 quite often, which is incredible when you see someone, particularly now, as I see people coming up to university, coming into their 20s and being 100% for Jesus. I'm like, look at that young fellow doing great. They're only like 3 years younger than me, but I think that's incredible. But yeah, there's definitely some people, there will always be people who fall off that wagon.
I think that age is so important. Like, I definitely had a faith before uni, but I think the summer before uni just had some really intense experiences with God, and there's definitely a lot of taking faith seriously in fifth and sixth year, but also a lot of not taking it particularly seriously in fifth and sixth year. I guess making that choice as we've been 17 that summer, just turning 18, of going into uni and making some proactive choices. Just part of what that's talking about, of being deliberate and intentional, and not just drifting in and out of it. And didn't have a church when I was through in Edinburgh. I visited a few different places and was involved in some kind of youth work, which took me out of the city quite a few weekends a year. But yeah, definitely went into uni with no, this is the path I'm choosing, and this is where I'm going. And it was, like you say, an all or nothing. Not really interested in playing about. Kind of in it or not in it. So my passage is something you said earlier that I was going to connect it to. So you said, do I see, I asked you a question and you were like, you're talking about people in the church or people outside the church, about being interested in church. Statistically, so it was a few years back, there's some research done about current church attendance and projecting forward, and Western bunches, the figures are horrendous. And there's a bit of a wake-up call of going, actually, if we just keep ticking along, the numbers are just going to go down and down and down. And historically, we were kind of joking about this earlier today, there's a way of thinking about church that says you just have good quality services, you preach the gospel faithfully. If people don't come in, that's their fault. And we keep our distance from the world around us. We do our thing, let them do theirs. If they don't want to engage, that's on them. But I think reading those statistics, you go, actually, we can't be content with just seeing a downward descent into nothingness for the church. And a challenge, maybe we need to do things differently if the current way of doing things isn't working. And this prophetic word from Jeremiah to a people in exile. So traditionally, for the Jewish people, it's very clear you don't mix with other people. You keep God as your God. You keep your people as your people. You don't mix. You don't marry outside the faith. You don't water down who you are. And Jeremiah is saying you're finding yourself in new context. So they're in exile in Babylon. They are now on the edges of society. They're not the dominant force. They're not in the same way the church in Scotland was once the prevailing narrative that people bought into. It was the way people saw the world. We now find ourselves as the outsiders. We now see ourselves as not the dominant voice, which is not a bad place to be in, I don't think. I think there's lots of good that comes out of that. But God says to Jeremiah here, tell the people they've to settle down. They've to root themselves in a place. They are to build houses, settle down, plant gardens, eat what they produce, and seek the peace and prosperity of the place you find yourself in. We're spending a summer eating strawberries in a house we've lived in for 9 years in this community, that we've decided as a family to put down roots here, to be part of this community, to not just do church in a way that we dip into a place and then come out, but to say, actually, if this is where God wants us to live. And when we bought our house, we'd looked at a few places across Dumbarton, and we pulled up outside, and our owner was like, no, this is the right place. And started to look round, and there was a Bible on one of the shelves. I was like, okay, interesting. And then after we bought it, we found out there's a family that lived there before them, and all 3 daughters became nuns. Not sure if my daughter will become a nun. We shall see how that pans out. But almost just going, maybe God's got a plan for us being here. And I think if we didn't live here, the Phoenix probably never would have happened. I wouldn't have walked past it, taking the kids to school every day. We wouldn't be rooted in this place. That I think God has a plan for us, and as we seek the best for the place we find ourselves in, that we'll be blessed as well. So as a church, I guess, a real strong belief that it's not about us serving ourselves, that it's not about us as the rock going, right, what's going to give us prosperity, what's going to do us lots of good, but going, actually, what if we sought the best for this place that we find ourselves in? What if we rooted ourselves in a place and didn't just dip in and out, but found ourselves here, living life with people, seeking their good? Then we'll see what happens. The rock still may die. This may not be the way to do church. I don't know, but the statistics say the old way of doing church wasn't working either. So let's go all or nothing. Let's go out in a blaze of glory, rather than just fizzle out.
For sure.
Or do the things God's calling us to do. We might just see something cool happen.
And be excited about them too.
Mm-hmm.
We've started Bible study we've done Alpha with over lockdown, looking at Mark, and today we're looking at Mark chapter 1, or I was looking at Mark chapter 1 today for our study, and the commentary I was reading was talking about, like, Mark gets to the point, like, it's really obvious in Mark's just like, and then Jesus did this, and then Jesus did this, and then Jesus did this. And I don't like Mark for that reason. I think Mark's got some proper gems in it, but I like that Matthew, Luke and John take their time a little bit more. Actually, what this commentary was saying, that, like, Mark didn't sit down and examine the facts of, like, well, is it going to work if we say this, or is it going to work if we say this? Mark was just really excited to be there. Yeah. Mark was just like, let's just do it. that's kind of what church is like. Like, Christians should be just, let's just follow that promise, let's follow that flat plan,
Yep.
and be excited about it.
Yes.
Yes.
We said doing part of these lunches this week, so we're recording this on Tuesday. So we're giving out 40 lunches so far.
Yeah, just
over the 2 days, which has been fantastic. I think things will pick up, but we said we would do some Facebook Live things. So you, as our resident social media resident young person, with a phone that works, would record some stuff. So you recorded one yesterday. I think you used the word excited about 40 times. A million.
Yeah.
This is young people's exaggeration.
It's the millennial.
Yeah.
I am excited. I'm so excited to be doing lunches. I will tell people I'm excited.
It's good.
If I'm still excited on week 4, we'll know if it's genuine.
So third verses each then. Ones that we would be excited. That's how you segue. Verses you would be excited to pass on to the next generation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to do yours first?
Yeah, absolutely. So my third verse is coming from Colossians. It is just one verse. Colossians chapter 3 verse 11 says, "Here there is no Greek or Jew, circumcised or uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave or free, but Christ is all and is in all."
I have Ephesians chapter 3 verses 14 to 19. Someone is knocking at the door. We will be right back. So in Narnia, when they go into the wardrobe and come back out, it feels as if no time has passed, but they've really had adventures of all sorts. So for you guys, it feels as if we've just disappeared and come back, but my family came to see us, so we've
had all sorts of adventures.
Yeah, there was a lion,
and a witch,
dwarves, all sorts.
Some badgers.
Yeah. But shout out to Mr. and Mrs. Beaver. Thank you for thank you for dinner. So my family just came to visit, but this is a passage that we have read at our wedding, and it would be a passage that I would pass on to my kids. So Ephesians chapter 3 verses 14 to 19. So we are back again after the camera running out of battery. But Paul's prayer to the Ephesians chapter 3 verse 14 to 19. "For this reason I kneel before the Father, from whom his whole family in heaven and on earth derives its name. I pray that out of his glorious riches he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. And I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power together with all the saints to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ, and to know this love that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God." So that's my passage. It is so long since you read yours. I can't remember.
Did I read mine?
I don't know. Let's.
I can't remember.
Who knows?
But it's so good, we're going to maybe do it twice.
Let's read it again, just because everyone else has forgotten.
Yep. To remind you, I'm in Colossians chapter 3, verse 11. It says, "Here there is no Greek or Jew, circumcised or uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave or free, but Christ is all and is in all."
You did read it.
I did. I realised when I got to Greek, but why not?
So why? I can guess why, knowing a bit about you and what you're passionate about. But why that passage? Why would you pass that on to the next generation?
For those that don't know, I don't think it's as obvious. I'm very into equality. I regularly heartbroken at the inequality that we see in this world. So there's a million things you can talk about it from that perspective. Before I worked for the Phoenix, I worked for Alpha. I was the youth coordinator for Scotland, which meant I spent a lot of time hanging out with young people, I spent a lot of time hanging out with youth leaders, I spent a lot of time doing research and stuff like that. And I was looking at the Barna report. They had just published a report. So the Barna are an organisation that basically just produce really good statistics for churches. They just produced a report on young people. It's quite Americanised, but they're not too bad as far as stats go. And one of the things that teenagers who weren't in church were saying was that they didn't think they'd be welcome in church because of how they identified or who they were, or they thought church was a place to be judged. They thought that God was judgy, that people were judgy, and it wasn't something they wanted to be in. And when I look at scripture, when I look at the way that Jesus lived his life, Jesus judged, but never unfairly. He called people out when they needed to be called out. But in his life, he judged and called out, and in his death, he brought equality through the cross that Paul tells us in multiple different letters. He kind of uses this quote of being no Greek or Jew, obviously to talk about God was now for everyone and not just for the Jews. And yeah, Christ is all and is in all, and I think that if the generation that are coming up a few years behind me, or the generation that you find your children in, or the generation that my children will come into, think that there's more judgment in church than there is freedom in, or there's more judgment in Christ than there is freedom in Christ, then we're doing something wrong. And we need to push that more than anything else.
Yeah, I think that sense of church, not when people are like, church isn't for me, I wouldn't fit in. I think there's a challenge in there that yeah, those terms there. And again, not blowing our own trumpet, but it's been one of the things I like about the Rock is I've come in on a Sunday down the years and there's been people in biker leathers and three-piece suits and tweed jackets and trackies. That it's not been a one-size-fits-all model. I know we've spoken a lot about race recently, as the whole world has been, and West Branch is not particularly diverse. I remember Andy and Joey coming to the Rock and just seeing not everyone being white, and their phrase was just felt a bit more like heaven. Just seeing a bit of diversity and not everyone being the same. That, yeah, there's something about everyone coming together from a whole variety of backgrounds and ways of viewing the world. But that everyone should have a place in that, everyone should feel welcome and included. I think there's a challenge in that we can be quite cliquey as churches, and I guess a challenge for the next generation, but for us as well. Saying, how do we make sure church isn't for churchy people, it really is for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. It's coming quite naturally to this upcoming generation. What I found anyway with the young people that I've worked with, no matter where you are in Scotland or where you are in the UK really, it's coming very naturally to young people that they don't see what you identify as, just who you are as a person. Like if you're a good person, you're a good person, regardless of gender, race, sexual orientation. There's appears to be less judgment in them as humans, which is nice. The Black Lives Matter movement has exploded over the last couple of months, and that's at the forefront of social media, and it's young people that are at the forefront of that as well. It's been really refreshing to see our own young people at the Rock we spent a Sunday night talking about this issue of race, the Black Lives Matter movement, what that meant from a biblical perspective, and it was really important because it was really it was a breath of fresh air actually, because a couple of the kids were just like, why are we still even talking about this? Like, why is this still a live issue? Which even for my age group, people I went to school with, racism was still a very dominant thing. It's refreshing to see that this generation want equality.
That's good. I don't know how to move between what you've just said and just look at my passage again. That's how you don't segue smoothly. But yeah, I think for me, I think we talk about grace and the love of God a lot as churches, but still don't get it. And I think sometimes we talk about the love of God too much, but we just don't get it. And I think when we do understand it, and there's been times in my life where it shifts from head knowledge to intrinsically becoming part of who I am, and in those moments I don't think anything can stop you, because you just get it. And I think like we as a staff team have, I guess, talked a lot about strengths and playing to your strengths, and chatted about what motivates us, and there's been some really helpful stuff in that. But one of my strengths, I think, is resilience, and just having a thick skin. I think part of that is I have never struggled with the idea that God overwhelmingly loves me. And that's not that I always feel lovable or that I feel deserving of that, but the grace of God is, maybe it's part of the DNA of growing up in the rock, that if there's one thing Alice used to preach on more than anything, I think it's that theme, that it's part of my DNA. Again, from my grandfather, from my grandparents, from my parents, this idea that God loves us, that we might be able to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ. And I think we change the world when we get that, when it becomes not just a nice idea, but when it becomes part of us. And I guess my heart for the next generation, for my own kids, for the other kids at church, is that they don't get fascinated by church and they don't get swept up in Christianity, but that how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ. And to know this love that surpasses knowledge. That if they can get some of that, that if the way we do church communicates that they're loved, if the way we sow into them communicates that they're loved, that if everything we do for this next generation points them towards these truths of Scripture, to these deep truths, then yeah, I think this prayer sums up my prayer for the next generation. I guess in it is the stuff you've just spoken about, that everyone gets to be part of this, that God's love isn't this wide, but not for you guys. It's wide enough for the Jewish people, but not for the Greeks. It's wide enough for men, but not for women. That all that gets blown out of the water, and we get to see just how massive it is. I've preached on this passage before and spoken about how we live in a 3D world, and this is a 4-dimensional love that is wide and long and high and deep, and it's bigger than we can see, bigger than we can understand. But it's just massive.
Yeah, I think that's something that really boggled my mind before, was this idea of like, I don't understand how God can love so much or why God loves so much. I don't know which one of those questions it would have been. I remember at about 11 or 12 deciding that it was all nonsense, and you know everything at 11 and 12, as I'm sure some parents are aware of with 11 and 12-year-olds. They know everything. I thought I knew everything. I thought that I understood God and that he was a bad man. And then at 17, when I became a Christian, having left school, started university, it was 4 or 5 weeks into uni. It hit me like a brick. This like you're standing in the middle of this empty universe, but it's actually not empty. Just every inch of it is filled with God, and you don't go through life as a Christian with that experience every moment, I don't think. But I think sometimes you can be in a really quiet situation and feel like you're back in the centre of that and surrounded by it, or sometimes you're in a really loud situation. Like quite often at PowerPoint, we'll be worshipping and I'll open my eyes and Caleb and Esther are standing in front of me with their eyes closed and their arms raised, and I just think like to have that love is just like it takes me a lot to not just like wrap them up, be like, you guys are the best. Like it's like adoration, I suppose, pride without being prideful, that this is the community that we're instilling in these kids, that God's love is unsurmountable, if that's a word. It's just that they're right in the middle of it.
Just going to wipe my hands off camera. Let me finish with the end of Paul's prayer to the Ephesians then. So he talks about grasping the vastness of God's love, and then he says, now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we can ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us, to him be glory in the church and in Christ Jesus throughout all generations, forever and ever.
Amen.
Amen. Amen.